Good morning, everyone. I'm Rebecca George, a junior at Hillsdale College studying politics and an intern at the Luce Center. I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker, who is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and has published several articles in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, and the Washington Post. She consistently contributes to the National Review, where she writes articles on feminism, the sexual revolution, and pro-life advocacy. Her co-authored book titled Tearing Us Apart: How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing explains the depths at which abortion has impacted our society. Her passion for the pro-life movement inspires her remarks today. Please join me in welcoming Alexandra DeSanctis Marr.
All right, good morning, everyone. It's great to see all of you here. I'm really grateful for the chance to be with you this morning. I've been giving talks about abortion and the pro-life movement for several years now. Oh, we good? Okay. For most of that time, my talks focused a lot on Roe v. Wade and how we can make progress as pro-lifers with Roe v. Wade in place. And I'm so grateful that finally today I can give a different talk. For the last couple years, I've been able to give a very different talk because Roe is finally gone. So as I'm sure all of you know, we're at this really remarkable moment in the history of the pro-life movement. After half a century, the Supreme Court finally got rid of one of the most unjust decisions in our country's history. The court rightly recognized that the Constitution never protected any right to abortion, and the court finally allowed the people and their elected representatives in every state across the country to begin protecting unborn children from the violence of abortion. This was a major victory. It was about 2 years ago, almost exactly. But as we've seen over these past 2 years, I think we know that victory was not the end of our work as pro-lifers. It was not the end of the work to end abortion. So here are the two main things I want to focus on for all of you this morning. Number one, what should the pro-life movement be doing now that we live in a post-Roe v. Wade America? And how should all of you as young women who are interested in and involved in politics think about our role as pro-lifers? And I want to speak specifically to how the pro-life movement can find success in this very different political, cultural situation we now find ourselves in. Unfortunately, what we've seen over the past 2 years is a lot of losses, frankly, for pro-lifers, which we can talk about more in the Q&A if you'd like. But we've also seen a lot of politicians, including those who describe themselves as pro-life, trying to distance themselves from the pro-life movement. A lot of people would like us to believe that being pro-life is politically toxic. So what I want to leave you with today is that nothing could be further from the case. Being pro-life is actually where most Americans are. That's not the message that we get, but that's really the reality. And in my opinion, in this new political, legal, cultural context created by Dobbs, it's essential that we have a strong, vocal, unapologetic pro-life stance. So I want to explain a bit more about what that looks like and how we as conservative women can help to develop that kind of pro-life witness. Because I think if you look at the pro-life movement, of course there are strong pro-life men, but it's really women who drive the pro-life movement. That's always been the case, and it always will be. So in the 2 years since Dobbs, especially for those of you who follow this issue, I think you'll realize what we've seen is commentators, politicians on both sides of the aisle make the claim that conservative election losses have been, at least in part, the fault of Dobbs and the Republican Party's position on abortion. This is now a pretty common argument. They argue that Republicans are seen as too pro-life and that this has become politically costly. Maybe we should just kind of set aside this issue, stop talking about it, and move on. I think this is a highly misguided view, obviously on principle, but also in fact, that's just not the reality. And I think it's essential for us as pro-lifers to realize and be able to explain that being pro-life is not an electoral liability. So if you look back at the 2022 midterms, a huge number of really vocally, actively pro-life politicians won re-election by huge margins. If you look at states like Florida, Georgia, Ohio, Texas, Oklahoma, sitting governors signed really pro-life laws, and they were re-elected. So meanwhile, other Republicans in the same states were defeated. I don't think those results would make very much sense if the midterm results were somehow a backlash to Dobbs or pro-life laws or the pro-life position. Instead, I think what we saw in 2022 was that there was a lot more at play for voters than simply reacting to Dobbs or the pro-life stance. I think they actually suggest, if you look at really every single race, that the most vocal, the most active pro-life candidates actually had a major advantage. So in my view, I think it's really clear the problem that we have on abortion, if there is a problem, is a messaging issue and not an issue with the heart of the pro-life position. I'll come back to why I think that's significant in just a moment. The second main point I think we have to keep in mind as pro-lifers, and especially as pro-life women, is that American views on abortion are really complex. There's kind of this narrative, I think, in the media, and particularly on social media, that everybody, particularly all women, are just pro-abortion. We all kind of accept that this is the reality, abortion is great. That's not true. If you look at the data, the overwhelming number of Americans are actually really much closer to the pro-life position on abortion than they are to the pro-abortion position. Most Americans actually really would like to protect unborn children throughout most of pregnancy. Sorry, very thirsty this morning, apparently. So I'm going to give you just a couple key data points to keep in mind on this, and then I'll tell you what we can make of that. So first, public opinion surveys consistently suggest that a huge majority of Americans wants to protect unborn children from abortion throughout most of pregnancy. More specifically, there's this annual poll of Americans' views comes out every January, and it's shown for many years in a row now that about 3/4 of Americans either want abortion to be totally illegal, want it to be legal only in very rare cases, like if, in cases of rape or if a mother's life is at risk, or to be legal only during the first 3 months of pregnancy. Okay, so that's about 3/4 of Americans, right? How often do you hear people talking about that statistic? Second, almost nobody in America supports allowing abortion until birth. Gallup polls, for example, have found that just 10% of Americans support that position, and just 18% of people who describe themselves as Democrats support that position. Okay, so almost nobody in America thinks that abortion should be legal throughout all of pregnancy. What do these numbers tell us? I think they tell us, again, that as a political matter, as a cultural matter, most Americans are a lot closer to the pro-life position than the media or politicians or the culture would have us believe. Meanwhile, probably many of you are familiar with this, but let's just run through what the progressive position on abortion is. Number one, abortion should be legal for all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason, up until birth. Abortion should be fully paid for by the taxpayer. The federal government should prevent states from enacting any pro-life laws, including laws that kind of regulate the health and safety at abortion clinics for women, or laws that prohibit abortions chosen on the basis of disability or a child's race or sex. They argue that doctors should be legally required to perform abortions, even if it violates their religious or moral beliefs. And they believe that doctors should not be required to care for newborn babies who survive an abortion procedure. These are highly extreme positions, right? This is really crazy stuff, and none of them is popular with most Americans. Again, most of them are not even popular with most people who call themselves Democrats. Meanwhile, we as pro-lifers obviously would like to protect unborn children throughout all of pregnancy. We know that every human being has the right to life from the moment of conception. But at the same time, pro-lifers are by and large willing to accept the best laws we can get, whatever policies we can get to protect unborn children right now, even as we keep working to change culture, change hearts and minds so we can get more protective laws down the road. In other words, pro-lifers are usually open to incrementalism. We're open to supporting laws that might not be perfect, but that are at least kind of better than abortion on demand or better than what we have right now. We've seen that since Dobbs, right? We're willing to pass laws today that most Americans can get behind. So this is a really advantageous position to be in. We're willing to kind of meet Americans where they are and help them to see the pro-life issue from our point of view more and more over time. In contrast to that, progressives are not open to incrementalism. They are not okay with any moderation on this issue whatsoever. They're fully committed to that little platform that I just gave you, this very extreme stance. They're not even willing to let voters in the state set their own policy on this issue. They're not even willing to support laws requiring medical care for newborns who survive abortion. That's how extreme this is. So what does this all mean for you as pro-life young women looking ahead to this really kind of brave new world of the fight against abortion? I think what it means is we have this major opening to win over the hearts and minds of our fellow Americans who are actually a lot more open to our perspective than we might think. I've come to believe actually that most Americans are closer to our position on abortion than they think they are. And that confusion is because the other side is so effective at convincing them that we as pro-lifers are the extremists rather than the other way around. And I think oftentimes we don't do enough to counter that narrative. We know, unfortunately, that abortion supporters will pretty much say anything they need to say to get the mainstream media on their side and to get away with kind of camouflaging the extremism of their position. And we've seen a lot of times that the maybe most prominent voices on our side of this topic are not always the most effective or the most vocal about speaking about abortion in a way that wins over voters. It's kind of helpful, I think, sometimes to think about the abortion debate like this big vacuum where most Americans are sort of on the sidelines. They're not sure what they think. They're not so sure really about even all the facts of the issue. They're just trying to make up their mind. And on one side, you have the most vocal abortion supporters just kind of filling that vacuum with all kinds of lies, claiming pro-lifers hate women, claiming pro-life laws aren't going to allow pregnant mothers to get health care, claiming unborn children are clumps of cells or parasites or other arguments like that I'm sure you've all heard. And on the other side, oftentimes, again, the most prominent pro-lifers, particularly in politics, don't really say much at all about the issue. They won't step into that vacuum in the first place. It's almost like they hope that kind of not talking about it and ignoring abortion will just kind of make the issue go away. And as a result, this kind of gives the pro-abortion side free rein and the media free rein to lie about the pro-life position. And we don't get to make a proud, compelling, compassionate case for what we believe. And I think it's because a lot of people fear that we'll be characterized as anti-woman. I think that's why it's so important for everyone in this room to know how to speak confidently about this issue, right? To be able to explain why being pro-life is not anti-woman, in fact, quite the opposite. But things being what they are, I think that silence often leaves this big opening for abortion supporters to define us as the bad guys. And we have every reason to think Americans are going to believe those lies if we don't figure out a way to counter them. So, where does that leave us here? I want to close by talking just a bit about my book, and I'm happy to talk about it more in Q&A if you'd like. But I think the argument of my book, which came out exactly 2 years ago to the day, which is kind of cool, I think it might give you all some insight into how you can sort of speak to this issue in your personal conversations or in whatever work you do. So our book came out just a couple of days after the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs. We wrote it in like 3 months leading up to the decision, and we obviously didn't know how the case was going to go, but we were hoping it would be decided in our favor, and we wanted our book to be kind of a roadmap for the pro-life movement. So what we argue is that in a post-Roe v. Wade America, we as pro-lifers need to learn a new way of speaking about abortion, particularly in order to win over our fellow Americans. And the root of our argument is that abortion has harmed our entire society, not just the unborn child. And that pro-lifers have to learn how to make that argument in order to change not only law, but especially culture, and to build a more pro-life country. I'm sure pretty much everyone in this room, or most of us, knows how to explain abortion is wrong because it kills an innocent unborn child. We know, I think as conservatives, we all kind of learn that every human being is created in the image and likeness of God, and that we have inherent dignity and value from the moment of conception. This is, of course, an essential argument, right? We have to know how to explain this. It's the most fundamental way to explain how abortion is wrong. But unfortunately, the reality is many Americans have heard this argument. Most Americans have heard this argument by now, and a lot of people are not convinced by it. So our book argues we have to go beyond this argument, and we have to learn how to explain that abortion has harmed our entire society. People who support abortion, you don't usually hear people say, oh yeah, it kills an unborn child, isn't that wonderful, right? How many people here have heard someone say that? That's not the argument. Instead, they usually argue that abortion has been good for our society, and particularly they argue that it's good or necessary for women. They tend to argue that women need abortion in order to be free and equal to men. So our book explains why instead of helping women, abortion has actually harmed them, physically, psychologically, culturally, and how it actually has not only harmed specific women, but has helped to create a deeply anti-woman culture. We also explain how legal abortion has harmed our politics, our legal system, the medical profession, right, redefining something that kills a human being as healthcare, and every aspect of our culture. So I think this type of argument is actually the best way for us as pro-lifers, and especially as pro-life women, to talk about the harm that abortion has done, right? To talk about not just the way the unborn child has been harmed, but the way every woman is harmed by abortion. We know that this is a grave moral evil, but that harm really does go beyond taking the life of the unborn child. this is kind of a crazy thing to think, but in reality, every abortionist is harmed by abortion, right? Everyone involved in it is touched by that evil. So I think learning to speak about abortion in these ways is not only the best path to legal victory or even political victory, but most important, I think it's the best way to reach hearts and minds and to kind of speak to the people around us about this issue. So I will leave it there, and I'm happy to take the discussion anywhere you want with Q&A.
Hi, good morning, and congrats on your 2 years anniversary.
Thank you.
My name is Paola. I'm actually from Paraguay, South America, just clarifying that. I'm an intern as a research policy competitive enterprise institute, and also I'm finishing a master's in George Washington University.
Great.
So in my country, we don't talk about these issues because we are a very Christian country, and we think that this is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So but all the world sees this as a sin, and also shouldn't even be allowed to talk in the Senate or Congress, and it's just never gonna happen.
Yeah.
Why the message of their side, like the left side, is so effective in their view, and are they just louder or
Here, you mean?
Yes, in America, because I don't see anything like this only here or Europe. So why are they so special with the message? Like, what makes them communicate their goal such a special way that we can't?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a couple of things going on. The first thing is, in the U.S., you have to think about the context of Roe v. Wade. So pretty much before this issue could be settled, before we could, abortion hasn't really been around in a really prominent cultural way for that long, right? Women haven't been getting abortions in this kind of systemic way forever. It's really only been the last 50 to 70 to 50 years, something like that, that it's really been something women have been seeking. And pretty much at the start of our debate over what our laws should be, over whether this was moral, the Supreme Court just came in, took the issue away from the political process, kind of shut down the political debate, and just unilaterally made abortion completely legal everywhere. And there was nothing we could do about it. And so obviously that was unfair for a lot of reasons, not least of which was that that's wrong constitutionally. But to your question, it created this sort of sense in the U.S. that, well, that's the position now, right? That's what we think in America. And so it changed the terms of debate. So the other side could always just point to Roe and say, well, this is American law. This is what our Constitution says. Pro-lifers have to go away. That's the end of it. And so they kind of had, pro-lifers have been fighting this battle with one arm tied behind our back, essentially, since Roe. And so it really created the cultural and legal conditions for the other side to sound like they had the upper hand, in other words. And then I think on top of that, probably the second reason would be the media, unfortunately, is really full of people who agree with the other side. Either they don't know the issue very well, or they sympathize with the pro-abortion side. And so they really, if you read articles on this topic, you're not going to find the reality of what's going on with pro-life policy or with abortion, or even like the idea that abortion harms women. You're never going to find that actual argument in any major publication. So it's another way in which we're fighting with an arm tied behind our back. So kind of two arms tied behind our back, and we're at a major disadvantage. So that's probably there's more to it than that, but those would be the two big reasons.
My name is Sarah Murley. I go to school at Patrick Henry College, and I'm currently interning at Concerned Women for America in Alexandria. First off, I wanted to thank you for writing your book with Ryan Anderson. I actually interviewed Ryan Anderson about his book, his and your book.
That's great.
For the Anchoring Truths podcast like 2 years ago, and it was just so enlightening to me. And
thanks.
I'm so happy to have you here. My question is, how did you establish yourself as a pro-life journalist? Did you, was that beat sort of thrust onto you? Did you choose it?
Yeah.
And any advice to share for other people who want to be journalists?
Sure, yeah. So I didn't really go into journalism thinking that this was going to be what I'd write about all the time. It's always been an issue that I've cared about a lot, kind of personally. I've always been pro-life and felt like I kind of had a responsibility to do something about this issue, but I started my career at National Review. I didn't show up on day one saying I'm going to be the abortion guy. That'd be kind of freaky, right? But the way it works at National Review, and I think at most publications, if you're going into journalism, when you're younger, you can't just show up and write about, the number one news item of the day. You kind of have to figure out a little niche to carve out for yourself where, particularly in opinion journalism, where you are the one talking about something that no one else is talking about. And at the time, abortion was definitely not as much in the news as it is now. I mean, it's always been kind of an issue that people talk about, but nothing like it has been the last 3 or so years because of Dobbs. And so I found that a lot of the kind of smaller stories on this issue weren't being covered by other people at National Review. My editors were happy to let me do it. And to your question about advice for people involved in journalism, I think it's really important as young people to develop expertise, right? Don't show up and start just saying your opinion about everything, because nobody cares, frankly. People still don't care about my opinion. They care about what's true. And so my opinion, if I write opinion journalism, I'm still sharing facts, and then I'm sharing kind of my analysis or what people should think, but it's grounded in what I know about the issue. And so I really started writing about this because I wanted to develop expertise in something and be kind of a go-to source on a particular topic and make myself more valuable to the place I was working. So long story short, I basically just kind of wrote about it more, and the more I wrote about it, the more I learned, and the more people wanted me to write about it and speak about it, and then ended up writing a book. And in some ways, I kind of feel like it all happened to me, and I'm still not quite sure how, but that's, I guess, the long and short of it. Just develop expertise, and if you can do it in things that you find interesting and that you're passionate about, even better.
Hi, my name is Kate Caprosi. I am a junior political science and economics major at Clemson University, and I'm interning with Congressman Max Miller this summer.
Great.
I loved your point that pro-lifers are still pro-women, and I think that message can get lost a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So leading with that message, I wanted your opinion on how, a lot of the argument on the opposite side is that banning abortion doesn't completely stop abortion, or it just stops safe abortion. How do you kind of keep with that pro-women message when, if abortion is completely legal or illegal, women are still choosing to do unsafe and illegal abortions? How do you stick with that pro-women message, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a couple good responses to that. The first thing is that there's no such thing as a safe abortion, for two reasons. Every abortion kills an unborn child, and that's not good for women. And secondly, even legal abortions are dangerous for women physically and psychologically. So if you get a copy of our book, you can find this information elsewhere, but we collect in our second chapter, I think we have more than 100 footnotes in that chapter, going through the long-term physical, short-term physical side effects of abortion, safe legal abortion, right? The long-term psychological complications for many, many women. We just don't hear about this in the media, but abortion is not this, go get a tooth pulled and prance home kind of thing. So it's not as though keeping it legal is making this great and safe and wonderful for women. But then secondly, I think if you look at countries where abortion has been made illegal, you don't find some kind of swath of women, dying in back alleys or something like that. By and large, the number of women seeking abortions does drop very steeply when abortion is illegal. And, you can do what you can to try and, protect women from essentially dangerous back alley abortionists. But it doesn't make women safer to keep abortion legal at a broad scale. The fact that people are going to do illegal things doesn't make law right or wrong, and doesn't make women better off. So I would put it kind of like that. And I'd encourage you, I've written some articles on this if you Google it or check out our book if you want some more kind of footnotes and statistics to offer people on that.
Hello, I'm Isela. I go to Biola University. I was wondering what your opinions were about President Trump's comments last night's debate on abortion.
I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about that.
Okay.
I think I'll just speak broadly, not specifically about necessarily his comments, but I think in general, it's not the case that the Dobbs decision just sent the abortion issue back to the states and only the states. It's not the case that pro-lifers have only ever wanted abortion to be a state issue. Pro-lifers have always wanted pro-life laws at the federal level and at the state level. And the Supreme Court decision on chemical abortion in particular was a decision based on standing. It was not a decision about chemical abortion drugs in particular. All it decided was that the people who brought the case didn't have grounds to be the people bringing that type of case. That's all the decision said. So the Supreme Court has not weighed in one way or another on whether chemical abortion can be regulated, whether it's legal, et cetera. And a very little known fact, there's federal law making it illegal to mail chemical abortion drugs. And that law simply is not being enforced by the Biden administration. So the issue, I would say, is a lot more complicated than it maybe was discussed last night and than it often appears in the media. And as a broad matter, I think Politicians who would like to be elected by pro-life people should have pro-life positions. I'll just leave it at that.
Hi, my name is Isabella. I go to the University of Alabama, and this summer I'm interning with Young America's Foundation.
Great.
I just wanted to ask a little bit about IVF, because it seems that a lot of people in the pro-life movement are speaking more about IVF. It's becoming more relevant as it's becoming more common. But different people in the pro-life position are taking very different stances on IVF.
Yeah.
So is this a problem that we should embrace to solve in the pro-life movement, or put it off like for the sake of unity in the movement?
Yeah, that's a really big question. I would say a couple things. I think IVF very naturally fits under the pro-life umbrella simply because there's, human beings that are conceived and frozen out there as a result of this procedure. As a result of the procedure, there's babies who are conceived and then killed. So it's very obviously part of the pro-life umbrella. What that means about what we should focus on politically is a separate question from that, right? So I think we've bitten off plenty more than we can chew at the moment, just simply focusing on trying to have a more pro-life culture when it comes to abortion. So that's not to say we can't speak about IVF at all, but just, having some kind of political crusade to get rid of it right now, I don't know, that's the most politically prudent thing to be doing as pro-lifers. But I think it's perfectly consistent to always say, look, this is not a pro-life procedure. There also are, talk about, harming our whole society. There's a lot of ramifications to IVF for women. It's not like some wonderful, healthy, great solution for everybody. And of course, always speak compassionately about the fact that a lot of people have a hard time having children. There's a reason why people are drawn to IVF, and it makes sense. But to be consistently pro-life, there are parts of the way that's done that are not okay. And that's, I think it's fine to talk about that as pro-lifers, even if we don't necessarily kind of rush into a political fight over that right now. So I put it like that, I guess, yeah.
Let's thank Alexandra Marr.
All right, thank you all so much.